let me ask you something really quick. If I say, yesterday I made my homework, made the dishes, and made the laundry, does that sound natural to you? Because if it does, you're definitely not alone. Thousands of English learners say these exact sentences every day, and the problem is, they sound completely unnatural to native speakers. And the worst part is, most learners don't even realize they're making this mistake.
That's so true. And the interesting thing is, this isn't a small grammar detail. The difference between make and do appears in everyday conversations, at work, at school, at home, and even in casual chats with friends. If you mix them up, people will still understand you, but you'll sound less natural, less confident, and sometimes even a little confusing.
Exactly. And that's why today's episode is going to be really useful. We're not just going to throw a long list of rules at you. Instead, we're going to talk about the simple idea behind make and do, the logic that native speakers use without even thinking about it, and the expressions you'll actually hear in real life.
By the end of this conversation, you'll understand the core difference between make and do, you'll learn the most common phrases, and you'll know how to choose the right verb in daily English situations. So whether you're talking about homework, work tasks, plans, decisions, or everyday routines, you'll feel much more confident.
So if you've ever asked yourself questions like, do I say make homework or do homework? Make a decision or do a decision? Make exercise or do exercise? Then this episode is exactly what you need. Stay with us, because this simple rule is going to fix a lot of your English.
Welcome to Speak English Every Day, the podcast where you learn real English through relaxed, natural conversations. No stress, no complicated grammar lectures, just useful phrases, clear ideas, and everyday language you can actually use. So get comfortable, listen carefully, and let's clear up the mystery of make and do together.
All right, Sarah, this is the part I've been waiting for. If there's one idea that can help me stop making this mistake every day, I want to hear it. Because honestly, I don't want to memorize 50 different expressions without understanding why they work that way. So what's the real difference between make and do?
Okay, here's the simple rule. We use make when we create, build, or produce something new. And we use do when we perform a task, activity, or responsibility. So the big idea is this: make is about creation, and do is about action or completion.
So if I understand correctly, with make, something new appears as a result. There's a final product, a result, or some kind of outcome. But with do, I'm just completing a task that already exists. I'm not creating anything new, I'm just finishing it.
Exactly. Let's look at a very simple example. If you say, I'm going to make a cake, you're creating something. Before you started, there was no cake. You mixed the ingredients, baked it, and now the cake exists. You produced something new, so we use make.
Okay, that feels very logical. So the cake is the result of the action. It didn't exist before, and now it does. That's why we say make a cake and not do a cake. Because we're creating it, not just performing a task.
Right. Now let's compare that with do homework. When you say, I need to do my homework, the homework already exists. Your teacher gave it to you. The exercises are there. The questions are there. You're not creating the homework. You're simply completing it.
So in that case, the homework is more like a responsibility or a task waiting for me. I'm just finishing it, not producing it. That's why we use do instead of make.
Yes, and this same logic applies to many everyday phrases. When you do the dishes already exist. When you do the laundry, the clothes are already there. You're just performing the task.
That actually makes things much clearer. So if I say, I made the laundry, it sounds strange because I didn't create the laundry. The dirty clothes already existed. I only washed them.
Exactly. And once you start thinking in terms of creation versus completion, you'll notice that many expressions with make and do suddenly make more sense. It becomes less about memorization and more about understanding the logic behind the language.
Alright, now that we understand the main idea behind make, let's talk about some real expressions people actually use every day. Because theory is great, but what really helps is hearing these phrases in context. When I listen to native speakers, I notice they say things like make a decision or make a mistake all the time, and I want those phrases to feel natural in my own speech.
That's the right approach. Some of the most common expressions with make are connected to results, changes, or things that appear because of your actions. For example, we say make a mistake, make a decision, make a plan, make progress, and make an effort. In each case, something new is produced, a mistake appears, a decision exists, a plan is created, progress happens, or effort is generated.
I like thinking about it that way because it gives each phrase a kind of story. When I make a decision, it means there was confusion before, and now there's a clear choice. When I make progress, it means I've created improvement where there wasn't any before. It feels less random and more logical.
Exactly, and you'll also hear phrases like make money, make a phone call, make noise, and make a mess. In all of these, your action produces a result. Money is generated, a call is created, sound appears, or a mess suddenly exists because of what you did.
So if I walk into the kitchen and drop a glass of juice on the floor, I just made a mess. Before, the floor was clean. After my action, there's a sticky disaster. That definitely feels like creating something new, even if it's not something I wanted to create.
Exactly. And that's why these expressions are so consistent. With make, we're usually talking about producing something, an idea, a sound, a result, or even a problem. Once you start noticing these patterns, phrases like make a plan, make a difference, or make a promise will start to feel much more natural in your everyday English.
Alright, so now let's look at the other side of the story. We talked about make as creating something new, so I'm guessing do is going to feel more like everyday tasks and routines. When I think of do, I immediately think about things like do homework or do the dishes, the kind of activities you just have to finish.
That's exactly the idea. With do, we usually talk about responsibilities, chores, and general activities. For example, we say do homework, do the laundry, do the dishes, do exercise, and do your job. In all of these cases, you're performing an action or completing a task that already exists.
So when I say, I need to do my homework tonight, I'm not creating the homework. It's already there, waiting for me. I'm just sitting down and finishing it. That makes the verb choice feel much more logical.
Exactly. And the same idea works for expressions like do your hair, do a favor, or do business. These are all actions you perform. You're helping someone, styling your hair, or working with someone professionally. The focus is on the activity, not on creating something new.
So if I think about my daily routine, I might say, I do the laundry on Sunday, I do the dishes after dinner, and I do exercise in the morning. All of those sound like regular tasks, not creative actions.
Right. And that's why do is so common with routines and responsibilities. When you remember that do is about performing tasks, most of these everyday expressions become much easier to choose correctly.
Okay, the rule about creation versus task makes a lot of sense, but I already feel like English is going to surprise us here. There are always those expressions that don't follow the logic perfectly. For example, I've heard people say do damage, and that sounds like you're creating something, not just performing a task.
You're absolutely right, and that's one of the classic exceptions. Even though damage is something that appears as a result, we still say do damage, not make damage. This is one of those expressions that doesn't follow the main rule, and learners simply have to memorize it as a fixed phrase.
So the rule is helpful, but it's not perfect. It's more like a guide that works most of the time, but there are still some expressions that just have to be learned as they are.
Exactly. Another example is make your bed. You might think it's just a task, like doing the dishes, but we use make because you're creating order. You're turning messy sheets into a neat, organized bed. So the language focuses on the result.
But then we say do your hair, even though you're also changing how it looks. That feels very similar to making your bed, but the verb is different.
That's true, and that's where collocations come in. Some word combinations are simply standard in English, even if the logic isn't perfect. The good news is that there aren't too many of these exceptions, and once you hear them often, they start to feel natural.
All right, I think this is the perfect moment to test what we've learned so far. Instead of more explanations, let's do a quick practice game. You say two options, and I'll choose the one that sounds right. It'll be like a mini challenge to see if the rule is really sticking in my head.
I love that idea. Okay, here's the first one, make a promise or do a promise. Which one sounds natural to you?
That should be make a promise, because you're creating the promise. It didn't exist before, and now it does.
Exactly right. Now try this one, do a mistake or make a mistake.
That's an easy one. It's make a mistake. You're creating the error, even if you didn't want to.
Perfect. Last one, make your job or do your job.
That has to be do your job, because you're performing a task or responsibility, not creating the job itself.
Exactly. See? Once you think about creation versus task, the correct choice becomes much clearer. And with a little practice like this, it'll start to feel automatic.
Now let's move into idioms, because this is where make and do become more natural and expressive. Idioms are phrases that don't always follow literal logic, but they're very common in everyday English. If you learn these, your English will sound more fluent and more natural in real conversations.
Exactly. Native speakers use these expressions all the time, especially in casual conversation. So instead of memorizing long grammar rules, it's often easier to learn these as complete phrases. Let's look at some of the most common idioms with make and do.
The first idiom is make up your mind. This means to decide something. For example, I can't make up my mind about which phone to buy. You're thinking, but you haven't decided yet.
Here's another one, make a difference. We use this when something changes a situation in a positive or important way. For example, a few minutes of practice every day can make a big difference.
Now let's look at an idiom with do. Do your best. This means to try as hard as you can. For example, just do your best on the test and don't worry.
And a very common one, do me a favor. This is a polite way to ask someone for help. For example, can you do me a favor and close the window?
Here's another with make. Make ends meet. This means to have enough money to pay for basic living expenses. For example, it's hard to make ends meet with only one job.
And one more with do the trick. This means something solves the problem or works well. For example, this new battery should do the trick.
So remember, idioms don't always follow strict rules. The best way to learn them is by listening, repeating, and using them in real situations.
Exactly. Try to learn 1 or 2 idioms at a time and use them in your daily conversations. That's the fastest way to make them part of your natural English.
All right, Sarah, I get the rules and some common expressions, but how do I make this stick? I mean, I can listen and repeat, but I still mix them up in real conversations sometimes. What's the best way to practice so it becomes automatic?
The key is to combine listening, noticing, and using. Start by paying attention to how native speakers use make and do in real conversations, podcasts, or videos. When you hear a phrase like make a decision or do your homework, pause and think about why they used that verb.
So I should treat it like a mini investigation every time I hear it? That actually sounds doable. I can even make a note of expressions that I hear often and then try to repeat them out loud in context.
Exactly. And the second step is to ask yourself a simple question when you're speaking or writing. Am I creating something new, or am I completing a task? That mental check usually helps learners choose the correct verb.
Ah, that makes sense. It's like a filter. Creation means make, completion means do. If I remind myself of that while I'm speaking, I'll make fewer mistakes over time.
Yes, and the third step is practice in real situations. Don't worry about making mistakes, they're part of learning. Use the phrases in your daily life, talk about chores, decisions, work, or even things you create like plans or meals. Every time you use them, you reinforce the pattern.
So it's listening, noticing, and then doing it myself. Got it. I can see how with a few weeks of consistent practice, these choices will start to feel automatic instead of confusing. All right, Sarah, before we wrap up, I think it's time for a quick review of the most useful phrases with make and do. I want to make sure I really remember them and can use them in my daily conversations. Let's go through the essentials one by one.
Great idea. Repetition is key for vocabulary. Let's start with make a mistake. This means creating an error or doing something wrong. For example, I made a mistake on my report this morning. The focus is on the result. You produced a new situation by accident.
Next, do the dishes. This is a classic do phrase. It refers to completing the task of washing plates, cups, and utensils. For example, I'll do the dishes after dinner tonight. Here, you're not creating anything. You're performing a routine task.
Then we have make a decision. This means creating a choice where there was previously uncertainty. For example, I need to make a decision about my weekend plans. You're producing clarity where there was none.
And do your best. This is an action phrase where the focus is on effort and performance. For example, just do your best on the test and don't worry about mistakes. You're performing at your highest level, not creating anything new.
Make progress is another make expression. It refers to improving or moving forward. For example, I'm making progress with my English pronunciation. The result's improvement is created by your effort.
Do homework is essential. It's completing school assignments. Example, I need to do my homework before watching TV. The homework already exists. You're finishing it.
Make an effort is about producing energy or intention toward a goal. For example, he's really making an effort to learn new vocabulary every day. You're creating intentional action.
Do someone a favor means performing an action to help another person. Example: Can you do me a favor and send me that document? It's about completing a helpful task.
Make a difference focuses on producing impact or results. For example, your support can make a difference in the community. You're creating positive change.
Finally, do the laundry. This is about completing the task of washing clothes. Example: I usually do the laundry on Sundays. Again, the clothes already exist. You're just performing the action.
Perfect. 10 essential phrases, a mix of make and do. Practice these every day, and you'll start to notice patterns that make English feel more natural and less confusing.
Wow, Sarah, I feel like I finally understand make and do in a way that actually makes sense. Before, it was just memorizing lists, and I'd forget them as soon as I tried to speak. Now, thinking in terms of creating versus performing tasks gives me a framework I can actually use in real conversations.
Exactly, Tony. That's the power of understanding the logic behind the language. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. Even native speakers sometimes pause and think, should I say make or do here? The important thing is to notice, practice, and gradually it becomes second nature.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to start paying attention every day, listening to English in podcasts, videos, and conversations, and consciously choosing the right verb. I can already feel my confidence improving just by being aware.
That's the spirit. And for our listeners, don't forget, the key points are simple. Use make when you're creating or producing something new, and use do when you're performing a task or completing an activity. Combine that with common phrases, idioms, and a little practice every day, and you'll sound much more natural.
Before we go, I want to hear from our listeners. Which make or do phrase is hardest for you? Drop a comment and tell us. We love reading your answers, and it helps us know what topics to cover next.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who needs a clear, simple explanation of make and do. We'll be back tomorrow with another relaxed, practical conversation to help you speak English naturally.
That's right. Keep practicing, make an effort, do your best, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye.
Everyone. Keep speaking, keep learning, and remember, every mistake is a step forward.